My name's Robert Barr. I'd like to introduce you to Neighborhood Ministries of Northwest Ohio. The ministry has evolved over the years from my own ministry. I was called to the ministry in 1965. My pastor began training me for ministry by sending me into the inner city in nearby Flint, Michigan, to a neighborhood center run by a coalition of 6 churches. I got to see the needs of the people firsthand and how inadequate my knowledge was. I entered college and studied sociology. I graduated with a degree in sociology and went before the Board of Ministry to be licensed as a lay pastor. The board told me that I was more qualified for ministry than 94 out of every 100 pastors. Many pastors no longer receive training in ministry. They originally received their training as associate pastors under experienced pastors, but few receive such training today. They go to seminary where they're taught to be preachers, but receive no training to pastor their churches. As a result, many church members are not being ministered to and are not being trained to minister to others. I learned shortly after just how serious that lack was. I started seminary, but had to drop out due to a lack of finances to pay for it. I'd been promised a church to help with expenses, but no Methodist churches were available because of the recent merger between the Methodists and the Evangelical United Brethren. A Presbyterian church asked me to serve them because no Presbyterian pastor wanted it. The neighborhood was blocked in by switch yards on 2 sides and fields on the other. It had been an industrial workers' community, but the factories closed and the workers moved away in search of work elsewhere. The church lost 100 members in 5 years. It had 5 pastors in that time, but none were able to help the church. The church kept looking for the same kind of pastor, in spite of the fact that the neighborhood had changed dramatically. The houses were bought up by rental agents that rented them cheap. As a result, the area was soon an industrial slum. The ritual of the Presbyterian church did not appeal to the residents, and there were Pentecostal churches there that did. The church rented space to a government poverty agency to pay the building upkeep, and they wanted me to find another source of funding. However, they were the only church who had up to 50 unchurched people visit the church every week. It took 6 months to convince them to stop trying to drive the people out and invite them in. Soon after, the church began to attract local residents, and in 3 months were able to call an ordained pastor. They realized that they needed a different kind of pastor than before. Armed with that knowledge, they were able to call a pastor like me, who had the training and experience to tackle the new situation the church faced. With no job and nowhere to go, I bought a small travel trailer and moved into a nearby trailer park. I got a job as an X-ray orderly at a nearby hospital and began a job search. Most residents of the trailer park were transient and moved frequently. They had few friends and very few family nearby. Few had any church connection, and I soon found out that many of the churches did not really believe the command to go into all the world. Like the Jews, they'd roped off certain people as not worthy of God's love. No church nearby wanted to start a ministry there. The National Council of Churches did not know of any such ministry. So I started to visit the residents and minister to them on my own. My training as a pastor and social worker has been a big help in bridging the gap between churches and social service agencies. I soon got a job with the welfare department as a social worker and moved to a new city. I began the ministry to the people in our trailer park and nearby apartments on weekends. Shortly afterwards, the price of gas jumped from 50 cents to $1 a gallon overnight, and many businesses closed. As a result, my caseload doubled in less than a year. Members of a church nearby knew that I was a pastor and working with poor people and contacted me. They asked me to help them set up a ministry to the poor people. Since then, I have found many Christians who want to serve God, but are frustrated because their churches don't have any ministries where they can work. All I was doing at the welfare department was filling out paperwork, so I quit when the County Council on Aging called me to help them expand their programs. They wanted me to sit in an office and answer the phones, but I knew the elderly would not call for help. So I asked them for a gas allowance and set about to locate the elderly. As a result, we were soon serving 10 times the number of clients as any county around us. Since then, I've set up programs for a number of churches and social service agencies. And Neighborhood Ministries was born out of that ministry. After 10 years, I was able to pay off my student loans and return to seminary. I was assigned a pair of dying churches. They had felt that they needed a pastor who could sing and play the piano to improve their worship and attract new people. Many churches feel that better worship services will solve their problems. However, instead of improving, the churches continued to decline. They apparently called me as their last hope because I can neither sing nor play the piano. I began to visit members to get to know them and minister to them. One day I met a couple who'd not attended in over a year. The husband was dying of cancer and required his wife to care for him. They had requested the pastor to visit a year before, but he never did. Once I began ministering to the people, the church began to grow. After seminary, there were no Methodist churches available, and I was called to serve as an assistant pastor of a large church, of the Church of God of Cleveland, Tennessee. The church had grown to where the pastor could not minister to it adequately by himself, and the church had begun to decline. I helped rebuild the church and Sunday school before the pastor was called to serve another church. The pastor was also district superintendent, so before he left, he assigned me to one of the nearby churches that was struggling. The pastor was a good preacher, but did not know how to minister to his people. I found that common, as few pastors are trained to minister to their people. The church had to take up 5 or 6 offerings in their service just to get enough to pay the bills. I began visiting members and ministering to them. Soon the worship service and the Sunday school started to grow, and the church was able to get enough in the first offering. Since the church wasn't able to pay me, I sought outside work to support myself while I was there. I found many pastors who struggled to maintain their church, but their church leaders provided little help. In the following years, I was called to teach at statewide conferences and wrote numerous booklets to help pastors rebuild their churches. And they've been in great demand. In the early 1990s, the state enacted laws requiring social workers to be licensed and to take continuing education courses. I secured my license and looked around for a source of courses. The National Association of Social Workers was very liberal, so I chose to join the North American Association of Christians in Social Work instead. In 1997, they invited me to teach classes at their international conference. Since then, they've invited me back a number of times to teach. Since 2000, there have been a number of changes. I began consolidating my booklets into books in order to make them more available. I now have 8 books, including books on Christian living, ministry, and rebuilding the church. I also developed an online ministry through a website and blog for the ministry, and through posts on Facebook and LinkedIn. The COVID epidemic has brought big changes to the ministry as many churches and conferences went online. As a result, I was forced to expand my online work. As a result, I began getting requests from India, Pakistan, numerous countries in Africa, and a wide variety of other countries around the world. They're very active in evangelism and have a great need for training for new pastors being raised up, but they have very few resources. In addition, there's also been a great need to develop online courses to meet the growing demand for teaching. I now have online courses on basic Christian beliefs, Christian values, and on the need of churches today. The ministry is constantly growing and expanding, and I look forward to serving you. Thank you.